Hello and welcome to the Trail and Adventure Motorbike Podcast with me, Clive Barber, and my good mate, Noel Tom. For the days when you can't ride your bike, there's always the Trail and Adventure Motorbike Podcast. Good evening. It's Sunday. I've just got back from a day trail riding in the rain. Fantastic day out with a couple of pals, but I'm fucking knackered now. So excuse my slightly lackluster performance recording this introduction to what is a fantastic podcast, really interesting. Today we have a fascinating podcast recorded with Martin Slowey of the Helmet Inspection Company. Who knew? Who'd even heard of it? One of his adverts came up on Instagram and I thought, geez, we need to talk to this guy. It's basically they offer a service where you can send your helmet in if it's had a knock or a crash or an accident, and they will analyse the helmet using some fancy technology and tell you whether it is savable or not. Martin is a great guy. Sounds like he was a bit of a scamp as a youngster, and he also tells us some great stories from his childhood. Have a listen. I think you'll like this one. So are you primarily road or do you have knobbly tyres as well?
These days, I've got a sports bike and I've got the ubiquitous GS as well. So the backstory there is that I was living in Aberdeen. My elderly parents were living in Elgin. During lockdown, maybe even before lockdown actually, they started to develop dementia at the same time. Father, early November last year, he fell in the house, broke his hip, had to go into the hospital. So I had to, it's a 65-mile journey each way from Aberdeen to Elgin. It's a single track. Well, it's not a single track, but it's not a dual carriageway, is what I'm trying to say. And it's not a great road. You can only go as fast as the slowest thing on the road, you know, and inevitably that's tractors and all sorts. So I thought, well, I'm not going to use the sports bike because that'll break me. I need some other form of transport here. So, and then lo and behold, one day I'm sitting on the toilet and on Marketplace, as you do, this German came into my life.
That's where I do most of my shopping.
I think auto trading should become a verb and a hobby.
Yeah. I did see that you've had Teapot One on previously.
Yes, Bruce. He's a good fella.
He's from up these here parts. Originally.
We've got a beef with Bruce now because he said he'd come and ride the ACT with us, and we think he's chickened out, too scared to go off-road.
He's got the new GS 1300 now.
Not going to want to drop that in the mud, is he?
He's having it paint corrected and ceramic coated, so he's not going to want to take that even out in the rain.
If somebody sends him a clip of that, he'll be shouting, I've been to Morocco on it.
Well, I was just about to say, yeah, rather than go and do the ACT in a wet, muddy Wales with us, he spent a week in the sun in Morocco, so we'll let him off. We're delighted to welcome Martin Slowey. Is that the correct pronunciation? Slowey?
It is, yeah.
I bet you don't get any jokes about that, do you, from your motorcycling friends?
Never, ever, ever. No. No.
So Martin's joining us, and I spotted Martin on Instagram, an Instagram advert, and Martin owns and runs the Helmet Inspection Company. And I thought, well, for us off-roaders, and I've literally, about 6 weeks ago, took about 8 helmets to the tip, because I hate throwing them away, but they have a lifespan, right? You can't keep them forever and they have to go. And I thought, especially for us off-roaders, people like Noel, a lot of our listeners, not me obviously, but they fall off a lot and they crack helmets off large pieces of granite and they have to be replaced, like the very, very expensive Shoei I had to replace a few years ago.
Why did you have to replace that?
Because I slipped off a very slippy boulder and I went down like a sack of spuds. Didn't even get my hands off the bar. My head had hit the ground so hard. And it took all the paint off the outside of the helmet and it was clearly very damaged. And I'm kind of thinking, this is probably the end of this helmet.
Was that on the Elterwater track? Was I there that day?
Yes, you possibly were with Mr. Hill.
Yeah.
And it was a very slimy bit of rock.
I always think of you when I go over that rock now.
Don't go over that rock. It's dangerous.
Barber Rock, we call it.
It seemed like something, Martin, that a lot of our listeners would potentially be interested in. Do you want to do a bit of an introduction to yourself? We'll talk about you, talk about your biking history first.
Sure, yeah. I mean, thanks for having me on your channel, guys. It's a real privilege. I think I've had a pretty privileged upbringing as a kid. My father was a keen motorcyclist, had always been into bikes. He had an earthworks business, all the big yellow Caterpillar nuts and bolts, and he was involved in building roads and bridges. He was very successful at doing that. At his peak, things were going really well. He decided to open up a few motorcycle shops around the northeast of Scotland, Elgin and Inverness area. That was a time when we were active in motocross, scrambling as we used to call it. Dad used to get access to fields and rough parts of ground, and he would take a Caterpillar D6 bulldozer and make a track.
That's properly privileged.
We've never had this before.
I was 6 years old. First bike I had was an XR75. My brother had a RM80, Suzuki RM80.
They were great, weren't they? I remember bombing around on one of those when I was in my teens, when I was 15, 16, and it was such a fast little thing.
In 1977, the RM250, that was the bike I always wanted.
Well, I was 6, so my brother would have been 8 at the time, I got his RM80 eventually, and then he moved into an RM100, I think it was.
I did do a 100, yeah, because I had a 125 Kawasaki, and I should have had a 100. I wasn't old enough for the 125.
We started competing in motocross competitions throughout Scotland. The bike garages, Dad had dealership for all the Japanese franchises, all the Japanese brands, plus the Italian ones, Honda, Yamaha, Suzuki, Kawasaki, Ducati, Moto Guzzi. And here's the real privileged bit. My brother and I got 2 brand new Yamaha YZ125s delivered in a crate. Those were our proper competition bikes.
Wow.
Did you have 2 each or 1 each?
Just 1 each. Yeah, just 1 each.
I raced against John Bonham's son, John Bonham from Led Zeppelin, and he was the only kid that had 2 bikes. I've told this story before. I won't go into it again.
It was another beast of a bike, wasn't it? The YZ was incredible. It revved at like 16,000 or something, didn't it?
Yeah. These were the bikes that I was on before I was 16. And the other thing that we used to do as well is, because my brother went on to work in the Elgin branch of the motorcycle shop, he would have keys to the back garage where we stored all the second-hand bikes. So on a Sunday afternoon, we would go down to the bike shop. We used to sneak into the back workshop area, switch off the alarm, and take your pick. And I remember going out on what was it? I think it was a GS.
Did your dad know you were doing this?
No, did he? Hell, no, not a chance. No. I remember my brother took out an LC350. I took out, which was a massive bike for me, for a 15-year-old, I took out a GS 1000. Just threw on our helmets. We used to just take these bikes out the road and just pray that we weren't caught.
At 15?
When I was 16, legally permitted to take a bike on the road, I had a Suzuki TS50, and it just felt so insipid. This thing was restricted to 30 miles an hour, so the first thing I did was I ordered a Malossi big bore kit, turned it into an 80cc and just kept the 50 stickers on the side, and everyone was cool,
Did you ever talk about this with your dad as you matured in years? Did you ever confess to him what you used to do?
Not a chance. No.
Did you not?
No. Even to the day he was on his deathbed, I just wouldn't fess up that.
Oh, you should have.
There was so many other things that we couldn't fess up to either. 6 or 7 years ago, I was out walking through the woods with a dog one day and having a chat with one of my mates. He'd just passed his bike test, and he bought a CBR 650. I'd been down to see him in Glasgow for a couple of weekends, and he also had a Thruxton R and this CBR 650. So he gave me a shot of the CBR, and that was me just hooked back again. So I was out walking the dog one day through the woods, and I just phoned up the Honda dealer and said, here's my card, there's a deposit down in there. And I went away and collected it and didn't say anything to the wife. And I came back up to the house with this trailer with a new CBR 650 on the back of it. I kept that CBR for a year, swapped it out for a Daytona 675R Triumph. Nice, beautiful triple engine on that. power delivery is just linear. It's just a straight line all the way through. Beautiful, beautiful bike. Just wanted something a little bit more powerful because all my mates with their litre bikes were coming flying past me once they got onto the straights. So it was a marketplace, sitting on the toilet one day, a marketplace job again. I saw an 1199S Panigale. I went to see that, and of course that came home with me. And I had a lot of explaining to do as to how I used to have a black motorcycle and now I've got a red motorcycle. So I've got that. And as I mentioned earlier, I've got the recently become a GS. There's another word that you add on.
What's the word? What's the word, Clive? What's the word?
We call people with GSs big bike wankers.
That's it. Yeah, GS wanker. Yeah.
We can even do you a T-shirt.
What are you using these bikes for? Is it just Sundays or are you travelling on them?
I bought the GS, justified it to myself on the fact that I could go through and visit my parents who are elderly and failing, and the sports bike was just not going to be able to cut it for me. Our lab is actually at East Midlands Airport, so it's just a stone throw from Donington. I've ridden down a couple of times, 400 miles each way for me, and I've taken the GS down, and it's just been a delight. It's just been such a great bike to chomp up those motorway miles. The only problem is that I just end up squaring off the back tyre. So this is the first bike I've ever had that I've actually squared off a rear tyre.
Do you live, in a way, in British motorcycling nirvana, don't you?
I'm based in Elgin, which is the whiskey capital of the world. It's Speyside. The roads up here are sublime. They're absolutely sublime. Don't get me wrong, though, guys. There's some really shit roads as well. You go up through Granton and Aviemore, and you take the back roads from Aviemore across to Speen Bridge. Oh, just amazing roads. And I found that I can actually ride the GS not too indifferently from the way that I ride a sports bike. Around these, that's how competent that bike is. I'm not disadvantaged in any way by having a big 1250cc adventure bike on the road. It's amazing.
We're going to segue from East Midlands Airport into the helmetinspectioncompany.co.uk. Tell us about the company, what it does and how you started it.
It'll be no surprise that we test helmets. The clues in the name. I have actually had a guy when we were at Silverstone one weekend set up on the stall, and he says, "What do you guys do then?" Trying to nip your sarcastic side and keep that in check. We test helmets. We test for structural integrity on protective headgear. It's not just motorcycle helmets. We get all sorts of different helmets that come through the lab. How did this come about? Quite a long story, but I'll try and condense it. But basically, I was out on the sports bike 2-3 years ago. I'd bought a new Slowey NXR helmet, 450 quid, 500 quid, and it was just 2 weeks old. I'd pulled over into a biker cafe just at the other end of Glenshee, Braemar. The Hungry Highlander. I don't know if you stopped there, but you would see there's always bikes there. And I thought, I'll just stop here and have a chat with people, But there was a load of bikes there that day, and I reversing my bike in and squeezing it in between these two other bikes. And I was looking around to think, where the hell am I going to leave my helmet? So I just did the one thing that I never do, and I put it on the indicator stock. And of course, that stupidity was repaid back straight away, because as I brushed past it, it fell to the ground, and I just saw these guys, about 30 heads turn round.
And they've all done it. Everyone's done it.
Everyone's done it, and they're all wincing, and I'm going, oh, shit. Took it over. We sat down on a bench. I've got a couple of my mates there as well, and they're saying, yeah, that should be all right. There's only a little dink out of it, Looks all right. And I thought, okay, yeah, maybe they're right, So I continued to wear it. And when I was out on the bike, and I just didn't enjoy being out on the bike wearing this helmet, knowing that it had been dropped. So I took it into a local retailer, Slowey retailer. They had a tech look at it. She gave it a really thorough visual, inside, outside, and she said, yeah, it should be okay. Should be okay.
It should be okay.
Right. Okay. Well, that doesn't exactly inspire me with confidence either. So I've got a little bit of OCD. I come back to the house. I'm on the internet. I'm going, right, Slowey, how do you actually test a helmet? If I'm going to send you my helmet, how are you going to test it? How am I going to get the confidence in any result that you send me back.
So was that the only option then before you, was to actually send it back to the manufacturer? Because I know you could take it into a dealer and they'd look at it. And I think one of the things that I read somewhere is they check the inside of the
EPS,
the polystyrene foam, just to see if that's cracked or there's any marks in, and then it's definitely knackered. But obviously we'll get into it, but you go into much greater detail than that. But was the only option then to send it back to the manufacturer?
Or just have the retailer? Because the retailers, will have trained people. They sell RI, they sell Slowey, they sell whatever, Schuberth. They'll have trained techs on site. And that's the same process that the distributor in the UK will go through as well, because they're trained at the same level. So it's just a visual inspection. But yes, you're right, Clive. So what they do is they'll look for any obvious cracks on the outside. What I've learned in the last 3 years is that the way that composite materials fail is if you see a crack, it's definitely dead. But there's a lot more goes on before you see any visual damage to the helmet. And then the other thing as well is they will visually inspect the EPS liner inside the helmet.
So EPS is expanded polystyrene?
Expanded polystyrene, yeah. And what most manufacturers do is they'll coat that EPS, because it's white when it comes out in the manufacturing process. They'll coat it with usually a black coating. And one of the first visual indicators that you get, which anyone can look inside their lid and look for this indicator, it's basically if you see any of the white coming through on that black, then it's time to retire that helmet because the EPS is shot, basically. What I started to do is I went going back to the research bit. I just still didn't have the confidence that I could just go and wear this helmet again, even after that engineer, that tech has looked at the helmet. I still don't get any confidence that I can send my helmet off to the manufacturer and they'll do a better job or a different job. I started to look at, are there any companies out there that actually test helmets that have been in service? I spent weeks and weeks and weeks and I just couldn't find anyone. Lockdown came along. My revenue streams had gone like that because I was self-employed. And I thought, well, I'm going to put together a business plan. I'm going to see if I can get the experts in their field to come on board. Through my network on LinkedIn, after a few hops down the road, I found a chap who is a professor at Loughborough University. He's in the Wolfson School, which is mechanical engineering. His name's John Tyrer. As it happens now, John and I are very good friends. He's now our technical director. John co-invented a technology some 30 years ago called chirography. Chirography is, I'm not the technical guy, so I ask him to explain it to me in layman's terms.
Even if you could explain it, the idiots that listen to this wouldn't understand it.
Martin, have a go.
In layman's terms, it's basically laser holograms in real time. You know, your bank cards have got a little hologram on them. So that came out of Loughborough University. That's the sort of stuff that they do. But John took this the next level and made it real time so that you could look at these holograms on a computer monitor without having to develop them and do all sorts of things like that. What we're doing is we take a baseline hologram. So we put the helmet on the test rig, shine the laser onto the helmet on the inspection points. So there's usually about 5 to 7 inspection points on one helmet. And then we apply a small amount of heat. Before the heat's applied, we've got a baseline hologram. Then we apply a very small amount of heat, 2 or 3 degrees, no more than that. So that's less than you would get when you walk from inside to outside with a helmet, you know. And then what we do is we observe how the heat dissipates from the helmet. And if there's any integrity issues in that composite layup, we see those straight away. We can see things like ducts and vents and things like that, which are uniform. You can actually see those with your eye, so you know what you're looking at, both on the results and visually. If the integrity of the helmet is compromised, it's usually non-uniform, and you can see that. Quite often we're seeing helmets that will come to us that the customer would just say, well, this is just a speculative test. It's been on the shelf for a couple of years. It's never been dropped as far as I know. But then perhaps we find some weaknesses around the rivet points, you know, where the strap goes in. Those are weaknesses from the manufacturing process anyway. If over time you've been stretching that, you pull out the straps, don't you, to pull the helmet down, that stresses those points over time. What happens is you just get things like, you know, spider's legs, just And then once that happens, the helmet's compromised. It doesn't heal, and it's certainly, as with use, it gets worse. And then if it's been dropped, visually it could look absolutely okay, but there may be cracks and anomalies and deformities in that structure of that composite material.
If a hard material has got any crack in it, you apply a large sudden force to it, that's where the crack just erupts, basically, doesn't it? And that's...
It's not even that. So let's say you drop the helmet, you think you've got away with it because it's, you picked it up, it's maybe only from waist height or whatever. You think you've got away with it because it's got a nice gel coat on and that masks all sorts of problems. So visually, you've given it a good look and it looks fine. If we were to look at that helmet under the instrumentation, it might be fine, or it might not be fine. We get asked this a lot of question. We get this question asked a lot of times. I dropped my helmet from waist height. Here's a couple of photographs. Is it going to be okay? We won't speculate, and we won't know 100% until we put that helmet onto our test rig.
Do most helmets survive an impact from, say, waist height?
We don't collate the data around the type of impacts because we don't always get that information. In fact, our engineers are testing every single helmet that they test. They test it blind. They've got no information about the helmet, and they've got no information about who the end customer is. We don't collect that type of information. What I can say is that of all the helmets that we've tested, you know that someone is sending us a helmet because it's got a story behind it. Whether they want to share that story with us or not is a different matter, right? Currently, we're operating at about 25% fail rate. Bear in mind that if someone's gone down the track and they've tried to use their head to stop them from low siding, they say, "Can I send you this helmet?" The first thing it will do is send us some photographs, and in those circumstances, we'll say no, save your money and just buy a new one. I think the point I'm trying to make is all of these helmets that people send to us are borderline or questionable, or to all intents and purposes, they look okay. So 1 in 4 have failed.
Presumably, you're not getting cheap polycarbonate helmets sent to you because, they're almost, some of them are so cheap, they're almost, you just shouldn't wear one anyway, but they're disposable, aren't they? So presumably you're getting higher end helmets in most of the time.
GRP is glass reinforced plastic is probably the most common type of helmet that we're getting. We're now getting carbon fibre helmets as well. We're seeing more and more carbon fibre helmets, but it's a composite material. We do the polycarbonate ones as well because actually quite a number of the equestrian helmets are polycarbonate.
What is it you charge? Was it £42.50 or something like that?
£42.
£42. So I've actually got 3 helmets now that I currently use. I've got my showy kind of road helmet, which is just, Showies suit me very much. It's the 3rd Showy I've had. Love it. But I've then got a K-Berg Tormax, which is a flip front, and that's the helmet I use to take off-road. And I think I paid about 140 quid from a bike show for that one. On the grounds that, it's 5-star sharp rated, so hopefully it's safe. B, I'm going off-road. Noel crashes into me every now and again and knocks me off, and sometimes I take a hit to a helmet. So I've just bought that this summer, actually, and the one I had before, it kind of needed a new visor, but to get a new visor was like 50, 60 quid. And I'm just thinking, I'm not going to buy a new visor for it because, in a year or so's time, I'm going to replace it anyway because it'll be 5 years old. Presumably to use your service, most people will either have a new helmet or a more expensive one, I guess.
Yeah, or one that they just like.
Where do you stand on the old 5-year rule, Martin? Should I throw away the helmet I bought in 2012 and occasionally still put on because I quite like it?
No.
Really?
No, absolutely not, no. And in fact, what I was just going to say is somebody sent us a 20-year-old anniversary helmet. The inside of it was just totally shagged. It was, the EPS was falling away, and we said, look, structurally it's sound, but we wouldn't wear it. It's not safe to wear.
I'm really interested to hear you say that. I thought you would straight away say, no, that's crazy.
Potentially your helmet from 2012 could be the exterior, the shell could be structurally sound, but presumably the polystyrene, the EPS liner, that degrades over time. And that's the thing that, from my understanding, slows down the time and the level of impact of your brain hitting your skull because that absorbs the impact.
Here's a really controversial point here, Clive. And you might not like it. Your listeners might not like it.
I love it already.
So JT, our technical director, he teaches ballistics and rocketry.
What does he know? What does Professor JT know about?
It's annoying, actually, how much he does know. Because you're asking him questions and you think he's never going to get the answer to this. No, he knows the answer. JT works with a number of different agencies as well, which are involved in designing body armour. And it's not just for motorcyclists, it's for infantry and so on. The EPS liner does a great job at helmet fitment and making sure that helmet is nice and well-fitting and snug. But as far as shock mitigation goes, it really doesn't do much at all.
You heard it here first, or possibly second.
Now, it might stop your skull from becoming fractured. That's brilliant. But if you've received a shock pulse from an impact, that shock pulse just goes directly through the shell and through the EPS. And then that's where you start to get BTIs, brain trauma injuries. At its least point, you'll get concussed. At the other end of the spectrum is you receive a fatal BTI. So that's a happy thought, isn't it, for us motorcyclists? But I try not to think too much about that when I jump on the bike. The EPS is not doing what I was led to believe that's what it does as well, but no, it doesn't. If you want to just go and test that theory yourself, take an old helmet that you're about to throw into the bin or the landfill, strap an egg to the inside of it and drop it. See what happens to the egg.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
We're being sold as a community and as consumers, we're being sold a message by the manufacturers, essentially. But you brought up a good point there earlier on, Clive, about Sharp, because they do Transport Research Labs. So it's TRL that do the work for the Department for Transport, and they do some amazing work. But it's all destructive testing, and it's all based on batch testing as well. And we know that the quality of manufacturing batches can go like that, and it can go up and it can go down. I feel as if I'm scaremongering a little bit now.
Have you ever found fault with brand new helmets, brand new unused helmets?
Yes.
You have? Gosh.
Yeah. I'm going into an area now that's quite sensitive. We had 3 helmets from a single batch from a manufacturer. One of the helmets was involved in a fatality. The rider had 2 more new helmets from the same batch. Bought at the same time. We were asked by Trading Standards. Trading Standards got involved in that fatality, and we were asked to test the other 2 helmets, and we identified structural weaknesses on the rivet points for the chin straps. That helmet came off. Whether or not it was, this wasn't accident investigation stuff on our part. We're just stating the facts. Those rivet points were weak. We understand what the difference between manufacturing defects are, because they are quite uniform, and what we call in-service defects. Not that common, but we do see them.
How much can sunlight affect a helmet, do you think?
It's ultraviolet. Ultraviolet rays are going to degrade most things, really, aren't they? Anything that's a composite is going to get... your gel coat will protect that to a degree.
It's just one of those things I've heard people say over the years that, you should replace your helmet every 6 years just because it's been in direct sunlight, for a significant amount of time, and that will have, as you say, degraded it. But I've never thought.
It will degrade the material. Ultraviolet is harsh on everything, But I think that, these are messages that are standard messages across all the manufacturers. That's their safety gap, isn't it? Right. Well, replace it after 5 years because your head sweats and the EPS liner is going to harden. You'll get UV damage to the shell, so the shell will be compromised. Okay. Well, nobody can argue against that, really. The only way that you will know is if you get it tested in a non-destructive manner, sending it to our lab, for example. That's the only way that you'll know. And every helmet has got a completely different story as well. I've got helmets that I've kept in a cupboard in the dark. They've been there for a couple of years because I've fallen out with them. I'll probably get them back out, fire them off down to the lab, get them tested before I wear them. I'm sure they'll be fine.
So that Slowey, which I don't actually use very often, I got it in the sale, so it wasn't crazy expensive. But potentially in 5 years, I could send that to you rather than taking it to the tip. And you can either tell me whether it's good or not, and then I can carry on using it for another few years. Yeah,
we get people who regularly use us as an MOT for their helmets. We've got quite a few customers now, repeat customers who come back and just say, there's my helmet again. It's that time of the year.
I think it's quite comforting that only 25% of helmets are failing, because of the ones that you get sent in, like you say, they've got a story, they've got some history, they've taken a hit. And the fact that 75% of them are actually going, no, they're fine, you can carry on using that, is probably a testament to modern manufacturing, I guess.
We've worked with some of the manufacturers as well, some of the more proactive, less conservative, should I say, manufacturers. Their design process, they use something called finite element analysis, FEA, to model theoretically how that helmet is going to perform. What we also do is we add to that and show them how it actually performs without breaking it.
So it turns out this was an absolutely brilliant idea you had, wasn't it?
Absolutely brilliant idea. And you know what? It's the only company on the planet that does this.
Unbelievable.
It's so unusual to have an idea and then you go to the internet, oh, there must be somebody else does this. And then you find about 1 million companies that do it. Like all the best ideas, it's such an obvious thing to do, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, the only curse about being the only company in the market that does this is that we have to burden the whole market awareness thing ourselves. We've got no competitors who are sharing that message.
So I've got a question for you. You probably don't want to talk too much about different brands, which are good, which are bad. So maybe just tell us what helmets you've got on the shelf.
That's our ultimate question to you, Martin, isn't it? Is what helmet do you use? Yeah.
Well, what I've got is not necessarily, I wouldn't say it's necessarily the best helmets, because my helmets are old. I've got ECE 2205 helmets, 3 of them.
Oh, you need to get them tested, mate.
No, I do get them tested. I stick them through as customer helmets. The engineers don't know whose helmets, but they know it by now, because it's got helmet inspection company stickers all over it.
What is it about those helmets that's made you choose them?
Fitment. So I've got a GT Air Shoei, and I've got an NXR Shoei, and those helmets fit me really well. I've got an X-Lite carbon, ultra carbon helmet, which is just a fantastic helmet for a sports bike.
When you put a helmet on, for you to know that it's a good fit, because when I buy helmets online, I don't try them first most of the time, but I always think I never really know how comfortable it is until I've had it on my head for 4 or 5 hours. That's when I'll really know whether it's a comfortable helmet or not. Are there any little tricks you have for working out very early on whether this helmet's going to work or not?
No, because I've bought helmets before in the past and thought they'd been really comfortable, and been 3 hours down the road and had splitting pains in my head, and thinking this is the worst purchase I've ever made, So I tend to stick with one particular brand, although I do go off-piste now and again. I do like a Shoei helmet. RI helmets are, the manufacturing process, and RIs, they're all handmade. I've recently bought a Ruroc helmet. I thought they looked cool. Atlas 4, which is really interesting actually, because it wasn't quite so much although it looks like a really cool helmet, it wasn't the looks that I was drawn to. They use, in the Atlas 4, they've taken a technology that they were using in their snow sport helmets, and they put that into their motorcycle helmet now. And it's called Rheon, Rheon. Rheon is a shock absorbing material. So when we go back to the conversation we were having about shock absorption and slowing down that shock pulse before it reaches your brain, that's ultimately what you want to do. And the EPS is not doing that. So some manufacturers are recognizing this, and they're putting in materials that dissipate the shock across the way. Also helps with the sort of anti-rotational effects of the helmet as well.
Is that like the MIPS, MIPS stuff?
MIPS is a shock absorption material as well, in a lot of cycle helmets as well, and it's making its way into motorcycle helmets. 6D helmets in the States, they've got their own ODS technology, which looks, to all intents and purposes, to be very similar. It's a shock absorption, anti-rotational. Climb helmets, something called Coroid. So we're starting to see manufacturers recognise and acknowledge that the EPS on its own doesn't cut it. That's one of the reasons why I bought the Atlas 4 helmet, because they use Rheon Labs, and Rheon Labs are an independent manufacturer of this material that is used in all sorts of different applications.
Noel, a question for you. What's the most you've ever spent on a helmet?
Probably around £200. I was going to mention that, I'm a big fan, Martin, of the open face helmet. and recently of the removable chin guard helmet.
See, me and Martin are far too handsome for open face helmets. We'd never have an open face helmet.
I had a great big curly moustache before I could rock that look.
You're not a fan of the open face. Well, you don't do that kind of riding, do you? I'm wearing those kind of sorts of helmets because I'm doing very slow trail riding a lot of the time, or even just trials riding. So that's what that's born out of, really. But quite often, I have to say, I've been on big European road trips where once the sun's come out, I've taken my chin guard off and it's gone in the bag and not come out until I've got back to the ferry again. That's just my cavalier approach to safety and my excellent riding record.
Now tarnished.
Personally, and this is just my own personal opinion, I haven't done the miles that you've probably done. Never needed to. Well, I quite fancy a flip helmet. I know that the structural integrity or the structural strength of a flip helmet is never going to be as good as a full face.
Well, when you're talking about, rivets, just strap rivets having such a major effect on a helmet, crikey, and then when you've got flip helmets.
RI won't even put a sun visor in a helmet, does it? Because it leaves a gap between the EPS and the actual shell, which they don't like. It's
funny, I'd name-dropping, CEO of RI, Bennett's did a feature on the RI helmet, and is it Kyoto RI?
Not sure.
And they mentioned him, and I thought, I was on LinkedIn, I thought, I'll send him a connection request.
Yeah.
And 2 hours later, he accepted it. So cue the sales pitch tomorrow.
And is the bulk of your business from what sort of discipline? Is it mainly motorcycling or?
It's mainly motorcycles, but that's where we've marketed to. We're all bikers. JT's a biker. He's got a couple of Triumphs, got a couple of Hinckley triples. The engineers in the workshop, they're all bikers as well. Just coincidentally, really. That's the market that you
pitched at.
Pitched at, yeah. We get equestrian hats. We get cyclists, we get mountain bikers. We got one aviation helmet come in. I can't say who that was from, but one of the defence companies, and that's a 25 grand helmet. So they wanted to make sure it was structurally sound before they started adding value to it.
Once you dig into it, you think, Christ, there's all the rally drivers and F1, all the formulas. There's a lot of helmets.
They don't get the same knocks. We don't really get any.
You'd still think they'd like some reassuring testing doing that.
You think so, yeah.
Yeah, maybe not.
You go to one of these race events and you see how you go walk along the back of the vans and you just see how they just chuck their helmets into the back of the van with very little regard for what might happen to that helmet. Motorcyclists are generally a lot more cautious. They're off and placed down nicely, and they get these helmets painted as well, and that sometimes costs the same price as the helmet itself, if not more.
What do people do if they want to take advantage of your service? How does it work?
I've been really meticulous about creating a seamless end-to-end process. That's my background in technology. So you go to our website,
helmetinspection.co.uk,
and then you can first thing that you get there is an opportunity to book a test, fill in the form, get your debit or credit card out, pay us the 42 quid, and then we send you detailed instructions on how to package up your helmet. It's always on the customer to get the helmet to us. We don't include that in our cost, but we do include the return journey in that cost. We use a courier for that. Once you've sent your helmet to us, there's a QR code, give you an address label. You print that label off, you put it on your box, and on that label is a QR code. We scan that QR code when it arrives at the lab, and you'll get, if you use WhatsApp, you'll get a WhatsApp message to say, we've just received your helmet at the lab, and you'll also get an email message as well. The next part of the process is to prep the helmet. So we put this inert coating. It's almost just like talcum powder on it, and it just stops the reflection from the laser. So we prep that. Once it's prepped, you get another text message to say, right, we've gone past that stage. Next, it's going to get tested. We test it. When we test it, the test result is binary. It's either a pass or a fail. We debated this long and hard. Well, what happens if it's on this threshold here, and is the structure compromised? That's the question you as an engineer you should be asking. Well, yes, it is. Right, well, it's compromised then. So it's a failure. And the reason why we do that is because, the more reason you give people to think that their helmet is okay when it's actually not, then that puts more risk on us as a service provider. So we don't supply inspection images as well. And the reason for that is because, no disrespect to your listeners, but interpreting a chirography image, it's a lot more difficult than just looking at an X-ray or an ultrasound of a baby, or an X-ray of a broken arm or whatever. It's an incredibly detailed image with a lot of data in it.
Leave the disrespecting our listeners to me. I'll do that.
Once it's tested, we're updating our customer every stage of every part of the process with WhatsApp and email messages. Once it's ready to go back, courier comes and collects it. We let the customer know that it's been collected and it's on its way to them, and then they get a tracking number so they can track it all the way back to their house. The whole process, apart from the actual inspection itself, is fairly well automated. One of the things that has always pissed me off about customer service is when you don't know what's happening. You've sent off a 300, 400, 500 quid helmet off to this company that you've only just heard of a couple of weeks ago because you Googled them. You're wondering what the hell's going to...
Yeah, is it just sitting on a shelf somewhere waiting to be unboxed? And yeah.
So I've really made it my business to make sure that we communicate at every single stage, and cuts down on the questions as well. So, cuts down on the phone calls from customers. Have you got my helmet yet? Or, where is it? Did it pass or did it fail? People know as soon as we know. A few customers say, if I buy this helmet off eBay, can I get it sent directly to you? And then you can send it to me after you've tested it. We do that. And I'm seeing more and more of that now. The cost of living crisis, people are going, well, do you know what? I'm just going to take a punt on this helmet. It's 100 quid. It's a 500 quid helmet that I'm getting for 100 quid. It's the right size. And, I know it's going to fit me. The seller says it's only a year old, whatever. Let's just try it. 42 quid.
Well, there you go. Fascinating stuff, right? I wish I hadn't thrown those 8 helmets away, including the 2 Showeys and the Arrow. Maybe they could have been saved. Hey-ho. You live and learn. Anyway, that's it. I'm knackered. I'm going to bed. Tomorrow, Noel and I are going to be at the bike show down at the NEC. If you're there, you see us, come and say hello. We'd love to meet you. Take it easy. See you next time. Thanks for listening. We really appreciate your support. Don't forget you can follow us on Facebook and Instagram. And if you really appreciate what we do, you could consider supporting us on Patreon or buy us a coffee. Links are available on our website, which is tampodcast.com, tampodcast.com, where we also have a limited selection of branded stuff. But either way, please keep listening and spreading the word. See you next time.